Hello there, and welcome back. Please, take your seats, make yourselves comfortable, and let me pour you a cup of tea. As a professor of literature and cultural history, I have spent decades analyzing how stories cross thought borders. Some narratives are so deeply rooted in a specific time and place that they feel impenetrable to outsiders. But human nature, greed, desperation, fear, and survival is a universal currency. Today, I am going to translate and reshape a fascinating, dark chapter of history for you. We are traveling back to the year 1943, to the frozen, Nord-esque city of Harbin in northern China, during the height of World War II, to help you truly feel the pulse of this narrative. I'm going to frame it through lenses familiar to the Western ear. Think of it as a historical, true crime, epic, a cross between a Martin Scorsese mob film, a gritty mid-century noir novel, and the psychological desperation of the American Dust Bowl era. Let's just turn back the clock and uncover the grim hidden history of the infamous 37 Flowers Lottery. Act 1, the ultimate shakedown. Selling a bridge at gunpoint to understand why our story begins in a state of absolute madness. We must first look across the ocean to an event every American knows by heart. December 7, 1941, when the Japanese military launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. They set off a domino effect that would eventually bankrupt their own empire by 1943. The tide of the Pacific War had turned drastically. The United States military was launching its fierce counteroffensives, and Imperial Japan's warships and planes were being sunk like lead weights in warfare. There is a concept called attrition. The Japanese war machine was burning through cash faster than a furnace. Burns dry paper. Back in the Japanese home islands, the economy had been picked clean. There wasn't a single scrap of spare iron or spare yen left to harvest. So, what does a desperate, occupying a military force do? When it runs out of money, they look to the territories they conquer. They turn to predatory exploitation, a state-sponsored mafia operation designed to strip mine the local populace of their very marrow, to fund a dying war. Our setting is Harbin, a metropolis under the puppet state of Manchukuo, heavily policed by the notorious Japanese Kwantung Army. Enter our first antagonist, Colonel Hashimoto, the chief of the Japanese Special Service Agency in Harbin. Imagine a high-ranking fascist cartel boss with a pristine uniform, a razor-sharp samurai sword, and a desperate mandate from his superiors: produce an astronomical amount of military funding and do it immediately. Colonel Hashimoto sat in his smoke-filled office, anxiously flipping through a ledger of Harbin's wealthiest citizens. His finger stopped on one particular name, the Ninth Lord Lee. Now, who was the Ninth Lord Leto, an American audience? Think of him as the Al Capone of Harbin. He was the undisputed kingpin of the city's criminal underworld, a man whose footsteps made the cobblestones tremble, He made his fortunes the old-fashioned way, running high-end brothels, underground gambling dens, and smoky opium parlors. Yet, like any sophisticated mob boss, he craved legitimacy and liked to play the part of a cultured gentleman. He grew out a magnificent, dignified beard that split into 4 elegant silver strands across his chest. He spent fortunes buying art and even built a lavish estate called the Water Cloud Hermitage. On the surface, it was advertised as a serene spiritual sanctuary for Taoist nuns. In reality, it was his private, guarded harem filled with the most beautiful women in the province. On a humid afternoon in the early summer of 1943, Colonel Hashimoto did not send an invitation. He brought a squad of combat-ready Japanese military police, bayonets fixed, and slammed through the front doors of the Ninth Lord's estate. The soldiers flanked the room Hashimoto marched in, his heavy boots echoing on the polished floor. Without a word of greeting, he drew his heavy military katana and slammed it onto the mahogany table. With a terrifying Li Longhe stared at the crime boss with cold, predatory eyes, opened his mouth, and demanded just 3 words: 10 million yuan. The Ninth Lord Li felt a cold sweat instantly drench his silk robes. 10 million even, or not a man who sat on mountains of illicit wealth. Physical cash of that magnitude during wartime was an impossibility. He bowed his head, swallowed his pride, and began to plead for mercy, explaining the economic stagnation of the city. Colonel Hashimoto let out a dry, sinister chuckle. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an official-looking document, and slapped it onto the table next to the sword. "My dear Lord Li," Hashimoto said, smoothly, "the Imperial Army does not take charity. We are businessmen. This is a legally binding bill of sale. The Imperial government is hereby selling you the Binzhou iron bridge spanning the Songhua River for exactly 10 million yuan. The Ninth Lord froze. If this weren't so terrifying, it would sound like an old American joke. It is the ultimate manifestation of the classic conman trope. If you believe that, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. But this was no joke. It was extortion, backed by imperial steel. The Binzhou Iron Bridge was the city's vital railway artery, a massive piece of public infrastructure. The Ninth Lord, he couldn't take it home. He couldn't dismantle it for scrap. And he certainly couldn't charge the military a toll. The terms were clear. The bridge stays where it is, but you hand over the 10 million, sign the paper. Or, now my men will test the sharpness of their blades on your neck. Right now, with a trembling hand, the underworld kingpin signed his name. When the soldiers left, the great Ninth Lord Li collapsed into his armchair, completely broken. He stared at his opium pipe, unable to take a drag. 10 million yuan was a death sentence. It would completely wipe him out. Act 2, the consigliere's gambit, the 37 flowers racket, while the Ninth Lord Li was contemplating which beam in his house was strong enough to support a noose. His butler quietly ushered a visitor into the study. The man walked in with a slow, measured confidence, wearing a sharply tailored Western suit. His name was Wei Chengxiang, and he was the chief imperial translator for the Japanese Special Service Agency. In the eyes of his countrymen, Wei was a textbook collaborator, a traitor who sold his language skills to the occupiers. But within the halls of power, he was a brilliant, cynical fixer who knew how to navigate both the bureaucratic cruelty of the Japanese military and the ruthless greed of the Chinese syndicates. He also happened to be a close personal friend of the Ninth Lord. Wei Chengxiang looked at the miserable mob boss, smiled faintly, and took an elegant sip of his tea. "My lord," Wei said softly, "why such a long face? This is hardly a unique predicament in our glorious empire. Have you forgotten about old Master Xing over in the capital city of Changchun? The military forced him to buy the emperor's royal palace for a staggering 20 million yuan. A drafty old estate isn't worth a fraction of that. Yet, old Master Xing not only paid off the Japanese, but he also walked away with a fortune in profit. Do you know how he pulled off such a miracle?" The Ninth Lord's eyes went wide. He leaned forward, gripping the table. "My dear Wei, please don't save your old brother. How did he do it?" Wei Chengxiang leaned in close, whispering 7 words that would unleash a plague of avarice upon the city, the 37 Flowers lottery racket. To make this understandable to an American, Wei Chengxiang was pitching what folk historians call a numbers racket or a policy game. Before modern state-run lotteries existed in the United States, illegal numbers games ran rampant in places like Harlem, Chicago, and the Bronx during the Great Depression. It was a lottery designed specifically to exploit the poor by offering a glimmer of hope for a tiny financial stake. Wei explained the mechanics, which were derived from a traditional lottery system from southern China. The Ninth Lord would act as the house. The game consisted of 37 distinct poetic names chosen from ancient folklore. Names like Longjiang Dragon River, Jinli Well Power, Qingyun Blue Cloud, Tianyu Heavenly Ox, and Hanyun Han Cloud. Every single day, the house would draw one winning name. If a player guessed correctly, the payout was an incredible 30-1. Now, if you do the math, and as an American familiar with Las Vegas odds, you will spot the trap. Immediately, a 1 in 37 chance that pays out only 30-1 leaves an enormous statistical advantage for the house. The profit margin was close to 19. The house would pocket the remaining 7 shares of every single bet placed across the city. Wei Chengxiang's advice was pure, unadulterated venom wrapped in financial logic. Think about it. "Lordly," he whispered, "at times are miserable. The people are starving, forced to eat wretched rations of mixed grain. They are terrified, hopeless, and desperate. And what do desperate people do? They pray for miracles. If you give them a payout that looks massive, they will gamble away their trousers. Best of all, we don't call this illegal gambling. We call it financial innovation. You'll give Colonel Hashimoto a cut of the daily profits, and the Japanese military police will become your personal security guards. Anyone who calls it a scam gets a one-way ticket to the bottom of the Songhua River. The Ninth Lord Li slapped his thigh in sheer exhilaration. The clouds had parted. He rewarded the translator with a fortune and immediately set the machinery of greed into motion. Act 3, The Great Delusion and the Dystopian Carnival, to launch this massive psychological operation. The Ninth Lord Li constructed a colossal betting arena near the banks of the Taiping Bridge. It was a massive wooden pavilion draped in banners. Above the grand entrance, erected a beautiful archway painted with 4 bold characters, Wang Dao La Tu, which translates to the King's Way to Paradise. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, a predatory casino masquerading as a utopian paradise. On opening day, the atmosphere resembled a twisted state fair. The Ninth Lord utilized his military connections to hire the full marching band of the puppet navy. Brass horns blared and bass drums thudded, sending a hypnotic vibration through the streets. To add an aura of divine destiny, these hired harbins, Law's famous fortune teller and feng shui master, that colorful charlatan known as Wang de Bagua. Picture this old mystic standing in the center of the arena, holding an ornate brass compass. The Ninth Lord Li, dressed in opulent silks, gestured to his servants. They brought out heavy crates of silver dollars and showered them across the dirt floor, hundreds of heavy coins clattering and gleaming in the sun. This was a ritual called "Stop Planting the Silver Foundation" to attract wealth. Watching this display of raw affluence, the thousands of citizens gathered outside felt their sanity slip away. The frenzy had begun. The daily drawing became the heartbeat and the curse of Harbin. The ritual was calculated to build unbearable suspense. Every night at midnight, in the secrecy of his private shrine, the Ninth Lord Li would pray, burn incense, and draw one single slip of paper from a wooden cylinder. He would place this winning name inside a heavy, reinforced steel lockbox and turn the key. The next morning, at precisely 9:30 a.m., the crowds at the Taiping Bridge Pavilion would grow dead silent. The sound of a roaring engine would break the quiet as a military sidecar motorcycle raced up to the stage. Few Japanese soldiers, with bayonets fixed and eyes cold, would dismount, carrying the steel box like it held the crown jewels. At 10,000 a.m. sharp, the master of ceremonies would step to the microphone, draw out his voice, and bellow. The box is open. In the moment the daily flower name was announced, the arena got transformed into a psychological war zone. It was a stark divide between ecstasy and ruin. The few who won would scream in mania, tearing their clothes and throwing silver into the air. But the vast majority would drop to their knees. Weeping and wailing, their life savings vanished in a heartbeat. The collective roar of laughter and grief was loud enough to echo across the frozen river. Within weeks, the social fabric of Harbin completely disintegrated. Shopkeepers abandoned their stores. Factory workers walked away from their machinery. Everyone carried a crumpled cheat sheet, obsessively calculating patterns, searching for signs from the universe. a new underbelly profession emerged: the runners, or paofengde. These were desperate street hustlers who walked door to door, acting as independent brokers for wealthy housewives, cloistered grandmothers, and wealthy elites who were too ashamed to be seen at the gambling den, but too addicted to stay away. People sold their ancestral jewelry, their land deeds, and the winter blankets off their children's beds just to buy one more ticket. The local courthouses were buried under an avalanche of criminal cases, thefts, armed robberies, and domestic violence, thought all fueled by the lottery. Act 4 tales of the macabre superstition and true crime noir. When humans lose control of their financial reality, they inevitably turn to the supernatural. As the months dragged on and the city bled dry, the methods for predicting the winning lottery names devolved into absolute horror and bizarre occultism. Let me share 3 vivid accounts that illustrate the psychological contagion of the era. First, there was the phenomenon of the grave diggers. A rumor spread through the slums that living eyes could not see through the steel of the Japanese lockbox, so one had to consult the dead. In the dead of winter, under the shroud of midnight, groups of elderly women began creeping into the desolate, dark, wind and howling cemeteries outside Harbin. With frozen fingers, they would exhume shallow graves and unearth human skulls. They would stuff 37 rolled-up paper slips containing the lottery names into the eye sockets of a skull, light a circle of candles in the snow, and shake the skull like a macabre pair of dice, chanting, "Good brother, show me a sign, bring me a fortune." On one occasion, a wild weasel rustled out of a nearby tomb, knocking over the candles and sending the terrified women fleeing in the dark. Yet the very next morning, those same women were huddled on a street corner, debating whether the direction the weasel ran was a divine omen, to bet on the heavenly ox. If grave robbing was the horror, then the trend of the porch prayers was a dark, tragicomic farce. A superstition took root, claiming that if a young woman sat completely not naked on the threshold of her front door at the stroke of midnight, holding a single stick of incense and chanting to the 37 names, she would attract a passing spirit who would whisper the winning number. A historical record highlights a family named Wang, who lived near our primary protagonist, a man named Zuo Qifeng. The matriarch of the Wang family, having lost everything, forced her second daughter, a young woman named Wang Mao, to perform this humiliating ritual. There they were, sitting in the freezing midnight air, praying for a financial savior. Suddenly, a massive sewer rat scurried out of the dark and climbed straight up the young woman's bare leg. The mother and daughter shrieked, jumping into the courtyard, performing a frantic, not naked, folk dance to shake off the rodent. The next day, too embarrassed to admit the truth, they lied to their neighbors, claiming they had dreamed of a beautiful white rabbit, and since the rabbit represented the lottery flower named Hetong, they bet their last coins on it. The box opened that morning to reveal Wuba, the symbol for a turtle or a rat. The old matriarch fainted on the spot. But the final story is a piece of genuine, blood-chilled wartime noir. It centers on a man named Liu Wenju, an upper-class soldier stationed at the river shipyard. He had fallen into a passionate, reckless affair with a married woman named Madame Fang. Both were degenerate gamblers who had been ruined by the 37 Flowers, facing a mountain of debt. They decided to orchestrate a ritual known as the blood sacrifice. One moonless night, they lured Madame Fang's husband out to the isolated lumber yards by the riverbank. With cold efficiency, Private Liu drew the military-issue bayonet and brutally murdered the husband. In a display of profound psychological distortion, the two lovers then committed an act of intimacy right next to the cooling corpse, believing that the raw juxtaposition of violent death and sexual energy would shatter their bad luck and force the spirits to grant them a winning number. The next morning, using the money stolen from the dead man's pockets, Madame Fang placed everything on two specific flower names: Hongyin, the red cloud, symbolizing blood, and Zhenyu, the root jade, symbolizing physical intimacy. In a twist of fate that shows just how cruel history can be, the steel box opened that morning, and the winning name was indeed the Red Cloud. They won a massive payout of 1,500 silver dollars. But justice, like the winter freeze, is patient. Within days, the summer heat caused the hidden body in a lumber yard to decompose, and the stench led the authorities straight to their door. When Private Liu was marched out to the execution grounds and shot, eyewitnesses noted that his mouth was stained a dark red from a watermelon. He had been eating a striking, gruesome echo of the blood sacrifice that had sealed his fate. Act V, the Eleger of Blood, and the next storm. This brings us to the grand finale of our historical chronicle. Within 90 days of launching this monstrous scheme, the Ninth Lord Li's vaults were overflowing with cash. He easily compiled the 10 million yuan demanded by the occupying forces and delivered it in heavy leather suitcases directly to the Japanese Special Service Agency. That evening, a lavish celebration was held at the famous modern hotel, the Madeira, on Central Avenue. The hotel was an oasis of European architecture, glittering chandeliers and jazz music, completely insulated from the misery outside, inside a private VIP suite. Colonel Hashimoto and the Ninth Lord Li sat in plush leather chairs, raising crystal glasses filled with imported blood red wine. Hashimoto clapped the mob boss on the back, laughing uproariously, declaring him a true patriot and a loyal friend of the empire. The bridge was officially his, but outside those gilded windows down along the banks of the Taiping Bridge, the reality was a landscape of devastation. The lottery had acted as a giant economic vacuum cleaner, extracting the final reserves of wealth from an already suffering population. That night, as the elites toasted their success, dozens of ruined souls, fathers who had lost their homes, mothers who had gambled away their children's food, walked quietly to the edge of the dock and threw themselves into the dark, freezing currents of the Songhua River. The waters of the Songhua River continue to flow to this day. They are a silent witness to a time when a desperate empire, a cynical dot collaborator, and a ruthless crime boss combined forces to turn a city into a living hell through the psychological weapon of a simple lottery game. The dark winds of the 37 Flowers lottery were still howling through the streets of Harbin, but a new tremor was about to shake the underworld. Just as the city reached its peak of desperation, a deafening alarm shattered the night over at the Tianbao Gold Shop, the most heavily fortified and secure jewelry vault in the entire province. A heist of unprecedented scale had just taken place, and a wealthy, high society young man named Young Master Wan, who had only just celebrated his wedding day, was about to be dragged into the center of a terrifying conspiracy involving the resistance, the mob, and the secret police. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our next seminar into the forgotten noir histories of the world. Safe travel.